Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah, and a very warm welcome to the Colonial Narrative. I'm your host Adnan Khan, and like always we're going to look at the narratives that matter by looking at the global issues that affect the global ummah. Now, unless you've been living under a rock somewhere, you couldn't have missed what's been going on in Iran. On Saturday 21st, US President Donald Trump carried out a attack on the nuclear sites in Iran. All three sites were attacked, and we're still waiting to see what the actual damage is. What I want to do today actually is take a step back and actually look at the broader picture, look at things from a slightly different perspective, and really try and put things into some sort of context for you. I want to begin after World War I, 1914 to 1918, because this is when the region was really carved up. At that time, Jordan, Iran as we know it, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, these places didn't exist. These were really concocted by the colonial powers at the time, which was France and the UK. And what France and the UK did was they drew lines in the sand and they created nations, which they then gifted to tribal leaders who had actually worked with them. Persia at that time had really declined from where it was. Really, it was governed by, you had a monarchy, the Qajar monarchy, which was quite frankly useless. And what Britain did during World War I, because it needed oil for its war effort against Germany, it basically occupied the country. And what it did is it left a colonel in power from a Cossack brigade who became Reza Shah. And Iran came to existence. He changed the name, but they didn't want to call it Persia. What also happened at the same time is the British Mandate of Palestine came to existence, which eventually turned into Israel. So both Israel and both Iran were really colonial constructs. That's what they really were. So it's interesting they're battling out currently when actually both of these were colonial constructs. So Israel, as we know, the Zionist entity, it came to exist in 1948 by seizing the territory, by expelling the indigenous population. In fact, the onslaught they're carrying out at the moment in Gaza, these are either descendants, children, or people who were kicked out from their homes from broader historic Palestine. That's how we've got to where we are currently. So really, what this shows us is both Israel, both Iran are really colonial constructs. They're fake countries, even though they're battling it out currently. And this leads us to some of the modern day issues that we're actually facing. So Iran and Israel, shockingly, were the closest allies during the 50s, 60s and 70s. So under the Shah and under the successive Israeli regimes, what you found is because of the Cold War, they were both on the same side. So Iranian agents used to regularly go to Tel Aviv, and Mossad actually had an office in Tehran. And in fact, Jews used to reside in Tehran as well. That's how close the relationship was. Then the 1979 revolution happened. And as far as the clerics were concerned, Israel is a competitor. It's a rival. And because the clerics had this Shia vision for the region, they came to see Israel very differently to the way the Shah saw it. So what you find is throughout the 80s and the 90s, the rivalry and the tension began to grow between Israel and Iran. So as far as Israel was concerned, Iran is a massive country, huge energy reserves, huge demographics, potentially huge military, especially when they were establishing proxies across the region in Lebanon, in Palestine, in Syria. So they came to see Iran as a very big problem. And interestingly, this was parallel to the rise of Benjamin Netanyahu in the 1990s. So that was Israel. Iran, really, the clerics came to power, and as far as they were concerned, is they had a mission in the region. They had a Shia mission. They were going to spread Shia Islam. They were going to establish proxy groups who were going to establish this in other countries. They were going to challenge the monarchies in the region because they weren't Shia. So really, sectarianism became a big problem from the 90s onwards. It was probably a problem even before, but it became a big problem then. So the other developments that we saw in the 1990s, we saw the rise of the neocons. And the neocons really, they came to have an agenda, which is we're going to reshape the whole world. And we're going to begin by creating regime change in countries that we actually don't like. And this was eventually made public by General Wesley Clark, who was the head of NATO in the early 2000s, where he said,
"This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
So obviously the neocons, this was their agenda. And for the Zionists and the Israeli, this was music to the ears. Because for Israel, if they can take over the surrounding countries, if they can overthrow regimes, it makes them stronger. So the rivalry really between Iran and Israel actually goes back a few decades. And Benjamin Netanyahu actually, since the 1990s, has been saying Iraq is close to a nuclear weapon. We're going to do something about that nuclear weapon. We're going to invade the country. We're going to do missile strikes. And actually, Israel, with Benjamin Netanyahu, has been trying to push America to do this really for 2 or 3 decades. Now, the reason why the neocons didn't do it in the end is because of what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. Absolute mitigated disaster. So what Israel wanted had to really remain on the side. So this really brings us to the current day. You saw Trump come to power. You saw Trump talking about getting some sort of negotiation over the nuclear weapons of Iran. It was Trump who ripped up the nuclear agreement from 2015. And I want to come back to this because this nuclear agreement is very interesting, because the discussion that we're going on now between Iran and America is a revival of the old 2015 agreement. And that agreement was Trump who ripped it up, and now he's the one actually calling for it. Okay, so Iran, it's going back to the days of Persia. It always had a vision that it wants this empire in the region. And the Shah, he had this ambition as well, to the point where he challenged America. That's why he was overthrown. And the clerics have also had the same ambition as well. The problem is that they keep coming up against America in the region. However, they managed to, in some form or shape, come to an agreement with America in Iraq and Afghanistan where they could work together. And the reason why is because they had similar interests in these regions. America invaded Iraq. America was bleeding to death from an insurgency. So America at the time realized it's going to consume a lot of resources. What do we do? So in 2006, you had the big Hamilton report, where they concluded that the only way we're going to survive and win in Iraq is if we get the surrounding countries involved. And what they were talking about was Iran and Syria. So what Iran did was they told all the insurgency groups to put their arms down and to join America's political process. And that's why from that day until today, Iranian proxies and Iranian-backed groups, they dominate the political process in Iraq. And that was how the insurgency, or the air was taken out of the insurgency, and America was able to transition away from the problems it was facing. Same in Afghanistan. You find the north of Afghanistan is integrated into Iran. So what Iran did was it got involved, it built roads, it built infrastructure, and Americans are on record of saying that the north of Afghanistan, because there was stability there, this actually allowed them to deal with the insurgency in the south of the country. So what Iran did is it had the same interests as America. It didn't want to see the Taliban in power in Afghanistan. America didn't want to see the Taliban in power. The Iranians always hated Saddam Hussein. America also hated Saddam Hussein. So they were able to work together in these two particular countries in order to achieve that. But despite that, we're in a situation today where America is bombing its territory. And there's one reason for that, and that is Israel. Israel has never been happy about America working with Iran in the region. In fact, throughout the 2000s, Israel had been lobbying America, it's been pushing politicians that Iran should be a pariah, Iran has WMDs, and we've got to deal with them. However, when the uprising in Syria started, America needed Iran to maintain stability there and to ensure the Bashar al-Assad regime didn't fall. So what you find is, despite the differences between Iran and America, they were able to come together in certain areas. But now America has extricated itself from Iraq. America has handed Afghanistan back to the Taliban. And when America looks at the region, what they see is they need to create an economic corridor from India that runs through the Middle East to Europe. This is to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. And for you to do that, you need to stop proxy groups running around. You need to stop the Houthis firing missiles. You basically need Iran to go back beyond its borders. And that's why you find after the events of October 7th, this is what Israel has been doing and what America has been doing as well. So effectively, America has shifted from working with Iran to now is shifted to working with Israel, and effectively is making Israel the policeman in the region. And this is something Israel has wanted to do for 2 or 3 decades.